In 1977, Martin Scorsese read the Herbert Asbury's The Gangs of New York book. He immediately declared it would be the next project he would direct. But there were obstacles to overcome. Over the years, there have been many attempts at turning the book into a movie. There was also the challenge of convincing Daniel Day-Lewis to take the lead role. He had not acted in more than 5 years. With casting in place and Miramax behind the film, there were still extending shooting schedules, script rewrites, release date changes, and endless nights of editing. After 25 years, Martin Scorsese has finally completed Gangs of New York, and here is the trailer for the film. I am pleased to welcome both Martin Scorsese and Daniel Day-Lewis back to this table. Welcome. Great to see you, my friend. 25 years.
Yeah. About. Yeah.
You wanted to make this film since you read the book, or was this even earlier than that?
Earlier, much earlier, I think, and it had to do with growing up downtown on the Lower East Side. It had to do with Elizabeth Street, Mott Street, Mulberry Street, and St. Patrick's Old Cathedral.
Yeah.
You know, and seeing that church and the graveyard and the red brick wall that's still there, still around it. And when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I heard these stories about these groups of people called the Know-Nothings, who wanted to attack the church at one point in time in the 19th century, and that the Irish-American community gathered around the church, not just the men, but the women and the children too, and the groups of Know-Nothings who came down from the Bowery down Prince Street were stopped by that and turned away. And I was surprised to hear that story because 8 or 9, I thought everybody, there was no problem coming to America, that when immigrants came in, everybody just assimilated. There was no, you know, what was the problem? I was surprised to hear about the anger and the rage against Catholicism and the Irish at that time. And so I started doing a lot of finding these old books from the period about St. Patrick's Old Cathedral and researching, and then I found the book Gangs in New York.
And what did that do for you, reading Asbury's book?
Well, that really made it very clear in my mind that that there was a whole section, in a sense, of in a way you'd call it American history, it's New York history, that was not really taught to many of us at school. I think we always thought about the Civil War, that there was the North and the South. I mean, elementary schools, not later, but especially I'm talking about an education in elementary school in the 1950s. The North and the South, there was a very sharp dividing line. Everybody above that line was for the Union, everybody below was for the Confederacy. It's not true. Particularly New York, apparently, is not true. There were a lot of Southern sympathizers, certainly anti-abolitionists.
And in the South, certainly in the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee, lots of people were for the North.
Yeah, and when I read the Gangs of New York, the Herbert Asbury book, the richness of the life of the underworld in New York at that time, and particularly the place of the 5 Points, which was termed the worst slum in the world at the time, in the 1850s. In fact, I think you know Charles Dickens came here, wrote a book called American Notes, and on his tour, he was quite horrified. He said it was worse than anything he had seen in the East End of London. And that's Dickens. And so when they say the film, when they say that the film is kind of Dickensian at times, well, I mean, he was here, he saw it, and it was even worse than what. But him, apparently, Davy Crockett came down. He was appalled. And Lincoln, when he came here to speak at Cooper Union, first visit he made was to the 5 Points to see it. It was that well known.
And did he say anything about it, Lincoln?
No. What they did to him was to take him to the old Mission, the brewery, the old brewery Mission, I should say. They had a class of young immigrant children who all cleaned up, and they showed him a class of immigrants being taught arithmetic or whatever, and that sort of thing.
You then took out an ad in Variety, said, "I'm going to make this movie."
Yeah, I really felt I felt I wanted to create that world that nobody's really ever seen before in film. Kind of a world that, in a sense, the foundation from all my other movies came from, I think. And I started working on ideas for it and gave it over to Jay Cox, and he started writing it, and we announced it with Alberto Grimaldi in 1977, I think. It was an ad in Variety with a famous picture by Jacob Riis, actually, which was taken much later in the 1870s, but gives you the idea of it. And the rest took a very long time.
So you had 4 or 5 screenwriters come in?
Jay and Steve Zalian, Kenny Lonergan, Three.
Three.
And Hossein Amini helped us at one point.
Yeah.
But the
Looking
three,
for what? Looking for a script?
ultimately getting my head around what exactly the story I wanted to tell was. Because for me, the book, Gangs of New York, led to other books. Herbert Asbury's source books of the period. I just wanted to say everything. I didn't know where to stop, you know.
Because this was your story. The story you wanted to tell.
I really wanted to do it, yeah. And there are aspects of it there's stuff in that book and in Luc Sant's Low Life, which is really the authoritative on all those books. There's remarkable stories of New York and people trying to live together and, how should I put it, testing democracy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so you get a script. I mean, you finally got some script. At some point, you've got to start casting. And then you got to find the money or whatever the way that works. You do the casting first and then find the money and do the casting. It is said that you wanted your longtime colleague, Robert De Niro, to play Bill.
Oh, well, what happened in a case like that is that he helped me with script originally.
Right.
And there was not an issue of him playing the part at all.
Never was.
But we discussed, of course, naturally we discussed it, but the reality was that I knew that in his interest at the time, it was more to help me guide the script a little bit, you know, and he was giving me other things of his, and so we kind of worked that way together. Went down to, he gave me Cape Fear that way, by the way.
Well, let me come back. I know that story. Go ahead, tell the story.
Yeah, he had me come down to hear a reading of the script, and I didn't like the way the script was going. It was written by, actually, Wesley Strick. It was really good. Right. But it was this, and also, the original Cape Fear is a very good film, so I said, I don't want to, do a remake, and so we just come down and listen. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. He had me come down. They all read it there, and Wesley was there, and Spielberg was there, and finally we went out to dinner afterwards, and kept saying, I really want to play this part of Max, and we had a big table, and Steve was next to me, Spielberg, and I said, but I just the script the way it is now. I don't, can't, the family is upsetting, and it's too happy together. I said, it's really annoying. And Steve said, you don't like the script, change it. Said,
so they had you.
Yeah. I said, wait a minute, what do you mean? He said, well, you could do this. He said, does the family live at the end? I said, yes, of course, they have to, because you can do anything you want up to there. And so that got me. And so it's that kind of a relationship that, and in the case of Analyze This, for example, I didn't want to do that. I didn't go along with that, and a couple of other things. But that's because I have my own interests and he has his own interests.
Okay, two things. One is that my understanding is that Cape Fear, they got you in exchange for doing something else. Somehow there was another movie that was involved in that.
Yes.
What was that?
I was not really another movie. Well, I guess it may have been. I was going to probably do Schindler's List, but
that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, but that was really Steven's project.
But Stephen had something to do with Cape Fear. Okay, but
yeah, he exec produced Cape Fear.
Here's what I heard.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. We'll join you. You'll join in a minute. Yeah.
He likes it. Here's what I heard: is that Schindler's List was on the table, and you sort of looked at it and developed it to a certain extent. And all of a sudden, Stephen realized that he wanted it, so he brought it back, and there was some kind of trade.
Oh, but you see, there was a trade. But the thing was this: with I had a project in mind for years, Last Temptation of Christ.
Right.
Many years.
Yeah.
I always talked to Steven Spielberg, myself, Jay Cox, Paul Schrader.
Right.
Everybody knew this project. We all talked. Brian De Palma, and Steven had Schindler's List.
Right.
For many years. And so the passion I had for Last Temptation, he had for Schindler's. And at some point in time, I think it was right after I did Last Temptation, I was offered to probably try to do Schindler's List, and got Steve Zalian involved and worked on the script for a while. And then during the process, I realized, that this is really his passion.
Yeah.
This is something he's got to go through.
Right.
And ultimately, at that same time, he had told me, Marty, one day I'm going to produce a film for you that will make the most money of any film you've ever made. I laughed, of course. And sure enough, it was Cape Fear.
Cape Fear was
and it made the most money of any picture ever made, which allowed Age of Innocence to be made and Kundun.
So you turned to a guy who's not making movies.
Well,
He's somewhere studying cobblers or something. Am I right?
My lips are sealed, Charlie.
Come on. I mean, he was here in 1997 for The Boxer. You didn't make a movie after that.
No.
Why not?
I just felt it was time to work away at other things for a while. And I didn't know how long it would be for. I knew that I was going to stop for a while and keep out of the game, but I really didn't know how long it would be for. And I have no concept of time. Maybe I'm wasteful with time. I don't know, but it was really quite shocking to me when somebody said, why didn't you do anything for 5 years, and I just didn't feel the time passing. I was very happily doing other things. So.
What were you doing?
No.
Here we go.
What were you doing?
So long ago, I can't remember.
You had to talk him into doing this. This was not an easy sale, was it?
Not really. It wasn't that easy. But there was a thought of, Daniel, when we were doing Age of Innocence. Jay Cox was a co-writer on that, and Jay had given me that script in the story, the novel, Age of Innocence. And we had just done another pass on Gangs of New York once again, back in 1990, Jay and I.
Right.
And so, Jay did. And at one point he looked up at me and says, "You know who'd be really good in this?" I know. You think he'd do it? I don't know. I said, and then we worked with him on Age of Innocence, and I said, yeah, that might be really interesting, you know.
Because he had
really
what?
Yeah, I want to hear this.
This is what you
What did you say? I'd understand the rage or something?
You'd understand the rage.
That's
Yes.
exactly what you said.
But he would. He would, you know. And there it was. It was all locked in and ready to go.
You mean you think there's rage locked inside of him? Or
Well, I think it can be tapped upon to do the work.
he's
when
right, isn't he?
necessary.
To stoke the fires.
He's
To stoke
right,
the
isn't he?
fires. Yeah, exactly. M&M in the morning. That'll do it.
Is he right?
I don't know.
Do you know?
I chose to believe that what Martin kind of meant was that he knew that if that's what I had to do, then I'd
there.
do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So whatever part of me was available to be investigated or whatever, you know, that I'd go there and stay there and
stayed there, all right. Yeah.
But, you know, I do have to say that it wasn't, you know, it sounds like I'm being very coy about the whole thing, but my reluctance was kind of a two-pronged reluctance. One was because I really didn't know if it was the right time for me to. But directly relating to that, I was also very concerned. I didn't want to, because he's hard to resist, obviously. And I thought, well, how far am I going to have to travel to get round him? And it was not without a sense of dread that I had this conversation in the first place. But of course, he started telling me about the story, and I thought, oh Jesus, here we go. But I really wanted to feel that if I went into this tunnel with Martin, that I knew I could be an ally for as long as he needed me, and you have to know that of yourself. And
wait, what do you mean by it? I knew I could be an ally if we went in this tunnel and if he needed me?
Well, because you know, everyone knows the demands that you make upon yourself, and that you know that the situation makes upon you, that others make upon each other, and so forth. And you can go into something with all good intentions and with goodwill and a certain amount of energy, but if you're not going to stay in there and see it through, then you're not an ally.
Right.
I don't mean like necessarily in any like specific way, but just so that Martin knows that he's got a core group of people around him that he can count on. Yeah. It's as simple as that, you know, because. You'd know there'd be a few naysayers around the place.
Yeah, there would be a few naysayers. Yeah. Well, you needed the guys around you, the men and women around you, to say, okay, no matter what. Yeah. It's raining, the sets have been destroyed, the costumes are burned, we'll still shoot. You know?
But he's tougher than anybody.
He is? Yeah. The toughest you know.
Yeah.
Was there anything about the character that made you say yes?
Yeah.
What was it?
I don't remember. Well, it was if I could repeat Martin's description of. He told me more about. In fact, he didn't tell me. I don't think he told me so much about the story as you were working on it, but more about the 5 points of that period and what was going on in the city at that time. And he told me about Bill Poole, who was the original Bill the Butcher, who was almost a folkloric character.
Yeah.
Let me go to you. Who was Bill Poole? Because this is who Bill the Butcher's based on.
Bill Poole is the Butcher in our film is partially based on, Bill Poole, but Bill Poole was Bill the Butcher Poole, who was a great gambler and man about town, a nativist in sentiment, who was lived in the 5 Points, was a great New York character, and had a running battle with every Irishman he could find. Every Irish man and woman he could find. Until finally, on Spring Street and Broadway, at the Stanwix Hotel,
Yes.
he met a Mr. Baker,
Yes.
who was an associate of his arch enemy, I think John Morrissey, the guy's name was. And a fight broke out at this new hotel called the Stanwix Hotel, which had only been open a week. And it was a weekend night. A fight broke out. Some things were said, and Mr. Baker came back with a gun and shot up the place, and he got hit. And within 5 days later, he died. But in time enough for his friends to say to his friends to report his last words were, "Goodbye, boys. Thank God I die a true American." And he became, at that time...
Which is in the movie.
It's in the film, yes,
Right.
but in a different form. Because he was killed in 1856, and we have our Bill the Butcher, William Cutting,
Right.
we changed the name, dying during the draft riots in 1863. Also, he became, in a sense, the character that William Cutting is sort of based on, became a kind of a martyr for the nativist cause against the Irish, because he was killed by an Irishman. And it was apparently... In 1856, was apparently what you would consider now, what was talked about in the 1920s, the great gangland funerals. With apparently this was the first of them, 10,000 people in the streets, and there was a great deal of anti-Irish feeling and hatred at the time.
There were some deaths even during the course of the funeral.
He was sort of the last gasp, I think, for the nativism until, I guess, the Native Americans and the Wide Awakes and all those groups changed configuration, I think, after the Civil War.
He was part of that tradition of philanthropic hoodlums, wasn't he?
Yes, exactly.
Sort of Robin Hood-like.
Yeah, carving the ears off a man one day and then just, handing out meat to the poor the next.
Yeah.
And he's a lovely boy, You don't have to lock your car when...
Well, John Gotti used to give fireworks for 4th of July. It was great,
But there is something about the Robin Hood. We'll see a clip in just a second. There's something about the Robin Hood nature of him. But also, because he's always giving away meat constantly.
Oh, yeah.
Your character is always giving away meat. Now, one point before we see the first clip. The Asbury novel the Asbury book was fact. And you have taken these things and you've moved them around to fit what? To fit your story.
To fit what I can do to represent the period, that period of American history, and also to have the proper backdrop, giving enough of the impression of the time, politically and socially, anthropologically, to give enough of a background so that our characters can stand out in the foreground and carry along our story in the foreground. Till ultimately what happens, it's really a story to a certain extent of a young boy coming of age, too. By the time he finally does during the draft riots, it's also the country, in a sense, coming of age and maturing. Ultimately, I always figure that, and I've heard a lot of historians say this, too, that the American Revolution was really completed in 1865. In a way, the country was unified, finally. And the years of the 19th century in America was the most violent century in American history. And I wanted to give the impression of that world, what it would be like to be in a world like that. Very primitive, in that area of the underworld at the time in New York. Almost all civilization, lawless, broken down, relegated to tribalism, in a way. And still in the midst of New York City.
Yeah, and tribalism marked by where they came from.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And their religion.
And religion, too.
Yeah.
Okay, roll tape. Here's our first scene in which Bill, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, meets Amsterdam, who was played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Here it is.
Your friend can't look me in the eye. That's not an admirable characteristic.
No one can look you in the eye, Bill.
What is your name?
Amsterdam, sir.
Amsterdam. I'm New York. Don't you never come in here empty-handed again. You gotta pay for the pleasure of my company.
Here's what you get a sense of throughout this film, is that Bill, the butcher, it is almost a lesson in leadership. I mean, here is a guy who understands constantly, that, and he says it, he's in fear all the time, or he's being tested all the time, and he feels that he has to show his courage and his capacity to have his way. Yes?
Yeah.
Tell me what you wanted this character, what did you want to, from within you, what you wanted to show about Bill?
Do you know what? I really wouldn't know how to answer that, because it's so long now since, I mean, just the very earliest stages after when we started getting ready for it, that I'd had any. Because at some point, I suppose, as far away as possible, if you're lucky, from the moment when you confront the camera, that objectivity that would allow you to think of it in that way just melts. And so there was no conscious intention, I don't think, to show him as one thing or another. But I certainly, like, I remember feeling as I approached him a great sense of, I don't know, certain kind of relish in his company before I. Yeah.
That's a great line, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I felt a certain relish in his company, meaning that he was someone you wanted to.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I don't know what that says about me, but there was something I found, I don't know. I'm kind of reinventing the truth because I honestly can't remember what my initial feelings were, except that there was obviously a sense of fascination about him. But I found him in his loneliness very touching as well. Just, I mean, when he was still just at some distance from me.
Yeah.
That's a clear point. I mean, what I find interesting about that, I mean, he did have loneliness, and there were moments in which, in terms of his relationship with the character that Cameron Diaz plays, there was a sense in which she said, he never tried to go to bed with me at some point. I went to him finally. I mean, there was a sense of there was a sort of internal sense of honor, or help me understand this.
Well, I think that's a very good point, because looking at something like this, we would tend to judge those people with the ethics that we live with today.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a very different
we could easily
time.
ignore the fact that they were living with a very structured code of ethics, even within the apparent chaos and anarchy of that place and that time. That there was a real sense of honor. There were things you did, things you didn't do. It seems as if anything goes there, but that's not true.
As I said, sort of based in codes for each tribe.
And fraternities.
And just in that natural situation. I mean, people come over, and the Irish, in a sense, gathering themselves into different gangs. They come over, there's no jobs. People don't like them because they don't speak English. Most importantly, they're subject to another foreign power, which is the Vatican.
Did young Marty Scorsese, growing up, hear these stories?
I heard stories from the church. I heard stories around the church, St. Patrick's Old Cathedral. My father remembered some old gangs from the teens, turn of the century. One of them particularly called, one gang called the Five Pointers, and the other called the 40 Thieves. That the names were apparently so interesting that they were just regenerated in each generation. Different ethnic groups would take them over. But it was also a place in New York called the Fourth Ward, which was very tough, downtown.
Fourth Ward.
Fourth Ward, yeah. I remember that sort of thing. And there was kind of a mythology of it. And it's even in the Asbury book. There's to a certain extent, there's mythology in there, too.
Tell me about the casting of Cameron Diaz and Leonardo.
Leonardo, when the idea was first presented to me, was by Mike Ovitz, one night visiting me while I was shooting Bringing Out the Dead. And he said, well, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, I'm not quite sure. I was talking about some projects. He said, why don't we do Gangs of New York?
Just like that?
Yeah. Mike also was a fellow who sort of helped us put together Last Temptation of Christ and Kundun and that sort of thing. He's gotten some pictures made my career that ordinarily could not get made.
You, in fact, have said he changed your life.
Yeah, literally. He was back in 1987. We got together, and he said, "I'm forming a new company, management company, and one of our clients is going to be Leonardo DiCaprio." And I had heard of DiCaprio from Bob De Niro because he did This Boy's Life, and De Niro told me, "This is a young man you have to work with someday. He's a brilliant actor. He's going to really develop interestingly. We should do something sometime or whatever." And then I watched him in Gilbert Grape, and I thought I didn't realize it was an actor. I didn't know it was. I thought it was semi-documentary, and saw him in Total Eclipse, a number of other films. Now, of course, this was after Titanic too, so that along with I think the range or the depth of Leonardo DiCaprio as an actor, the bankability thereof in Titanic. And when Ovitz mentioned this, I said, well, that would be really interesting.
That'd be great.
That'd be interesting. He said, well, where's the script? I said, we have the script, but we haven't worked on the script like in 8 years.
Yeah.
So that started a long process.
Did you then have to go build up the character of Amsterdam so it would be appealing to?
To a certain extent. We had left it, Jay Cox had left it in 1990, I think, at a certain point. We said, listen, if it's ever going to be a reality, we'll go back to it and and he'll work on it again. Jay would work on it again. And that's what we sort of did. And we started harnessing the picture because over the years, naturally, there was so much in it that we had to keep getting it down to a shootable length and size, really. One of the big problems we had in this picture for 20 years, 20 some odd years, is that none of these places exist in New York. It's basically gone. I mean, I was down there today. And
5 Points.
5 Points is, there's maybe 2 of the points left in Columbus Park, right around the federal courthouses and that sort of thing. I guess they sort of just bulldozed over the area, pretend it never existed, and symbolically put up the courts of justice.
Which raises the question why you shot this in Rome.
Well, yeah, because there are no places in New York that could have, none exist. None even remotely resemble what New York was like in that area.
The exteriors.
The exteriors.
So the exteriors in Rome more closely resembled what?
Well, they were built.
Yeah.
And
right.
that's eventually when Harvey Weinstein came into the picture, and I must say, I've always said this. Even I'm sorry, but even when we were talking about doing the film, there was always a part of me that never believed that the picture ultimately would get made. You know the way it is in terms of because it was such a big film. And when they started building the sets,
because it was a big budget film.
Big budget, yes. And when they started building the sets, even then, I said, we'll see, we'll see. One day I had to go take a look in Rome. It was in June. I said, all right. And we were still working on all kinds of things. Dante Ferretti, I got a great deal at Cinecittà. Cinecittà Studios wanted to regenerate their presence in the film community, in the film world. Made a very good deal for the American companies, and built, I think, the biggest sets ever at Cinecittà. And probably, I know when George Lucas came to visit a few weeks before shooting started, he was looking around. He was shooting Star Wars there in Italy, and he's looking around. And he said, "Let's get a picture taken." We had a little picture of the two of us in Paradise Square. There was nobody else there. And he said, on one side is the old and one side is the new. And he said, I'm the new. He said, the CGI you won't be needing these sets anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's the last time.
Because he's the master of digital technology.
It may be the last time sets like this are built. Maybe almost a mile of New York was built.
Wow.
Based on,
It was.
Yeah. We just lived in it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
The Italian craftsmen are second to none
Amazing.
as well.
Amazing.
I mean, the quality of the work they did was...
Let me just come back. During this 5 years off, where were you living? Where were you living?
Well, in Ireland for part of it.
Your house in Ireland?
Yeah, yeah. This is a little time here.
Yeah.
A little time in Italy.
That's what I thought. There is also, so I want to get to Cameron too. So was that?
Well, Cameron Diaz, Joe Rothen mentioned it to me, and I met her, and then I met her. She's very nice. Saw There's Something About Mary. I thought she was very funny, very good. I saw a John Malkovich film. I thought she was good. And then once again, in one of the further steps into production was an audition process. And she said she would audition. So when we were auditioning all these other young women, she came along. And quite honestly, when she auditioned with Leo together, I saw something happen between the two of them that I liked. I saw kind of a spark and a humor and an attitude. And I said, well, this is what we need.
Yeah.
It was just one of those things. I had never really, I'd only see her in 2 movies.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen the other pictures.
And she'd never been in a movie with him?
No.
And it worked, and you said, this
I
is it,
thought it
I
was
got
great.
it. Yeah.
I thought it was great. And also the character she's playing, I thought there was a character we were still working on again, Jenny, that Jay and I had worked on for years. And
we're going to see her in just a moment as soon as they rack it up. This picture with Jenny in the film in which she's in, actually, this is a knife-throwing incident in which is a dramatic moment.
Incident, yes.
Set this, okay.
That was good,
I don't know if we can. It's,
come on, tell me.
You better try.
Incidents, tell me. We have nothing to hide here.
I don't want to give. No, we do have something to hide.
We don't want to give away
though.
too much of the film.
We have
at
something
this point.
to hide. But anyhow,
okay.
This is the commemoration of the. This is the native
Victory.
commemoration day of the great victory over the Irish.
And he is the star of the show.
Oh yeah.
This is my place. This is my dominion, and I'm running this show.
And you're on stage.
I'm on stage.
And
I have something against these young people, which I'm not going to tell.
Roll tape. Here it is.
Anything in your pockets tonight?
Oh, I ain't started working yet.
What about that locket that I gave you? Apologies, my dear. Pick it up.
whoopsie daisy was it? You just did that. Did you signal it or you just did it?
I don't remember.
You just did it.
Just did it.
You just did it.
Just did
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And here's what I was asking, because you said look at his eyes.
Oh,
his
yeah,
eyes,
those,
when you looked over Leonardo, his eyes were...
Like that, yeah. And he was just reacting off camera to Bill off camera when Bill was doing his thing with the knives. And by the way, the actual Bill the Butcher, Bill Poole, was known for knife throwing.
Right.
So again, it's an instance of faction in a way. We take a fact and we move it into a fictitious area.
Yeah, exactly.
But in all those reactions that you'll see, ultimately, if you see the film of Leo reacting to the knife throws and the hits, they were all separate shots, all designed separately, and tracks and moves and all sorts of things, so that we overlapped and redid it many times, really. But that's the way. That's why this sequence, I think, is actually one of our. We kind of like that as a favorite. This little sequence. Each one of the shots, each shot in it had something a little special that we were trying at that point. I mean, every film, every shot should have something.
Yeah, but you know.
But we had a little more fun with this one.
It's so nice to hear him talk about movies because he just loves every single frame. Every frame. Doesn't he?
Sure.
And that's what makes it both difficult and exhilarating in the end. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
There is also this story in Gangs of New York, which I liked a lot. And I think this, I haven't seen a performance any better than yours in movies all year. I mean, it is clearly the best. I mean, you've had a lot of extraordinary performances. Do you feel that way about it? I mean, how to put this in some context in terms of just the sense of getting it, just the sense of landing it? I'm looking for a sports metaphor.
You mean now it's over?
Yeah, now it's over.
I haven't actually seen. I'm looking forward to seeing
the more polished, finished version.
I saw it.
You know how you are in this film. You don't have to see a polished version to know that you created a character here.
Well, I think Martin and I both. I think we both understand this thing of like, he's seen the film a lot of times, so whatever sense of a missed opportunity that he might have felt initially, like why didn't we get that, or why isn't this thing here that I need now, and so forth. He's had a chance to burn that away and see it for what it is and accept it for what it is, and I've still got to go through that initial thing of seeing all those things that I just would have wished to have done differently.
Yeah. Here is an interesting story about the craft of directing and acting. Most of us watching a movie don't have any idea about the options the actor chooses, moment to moment. And what a director does, both in setting it up, the number of shots, and then at the end, editing it, the options, choosing options, you know. And if you haven't chosen the right option, or try, you can't
so
go back.
often those, because you're making so many decisions every day, but most of them, if things are going well, in Martin's case, they're for the most part conscious decisions, and if things are going well for me, for the most part, they take place at some other level. So you have no sense of control for the most part of those decisions that are being made nonetheless. And it's always with a sense, and I know it's always, I'm always surprised when I see the thing itself, the finished thing, because you're working with this great sense of intimacy in a rather secretive way with a group of accomplices on something that feels kind of wild and out in the frontier, and there's always that moment when you're confronted with the reality and you think, is that all it was? You felt so much further away from whatever. So,
but
you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, but in that sense, the choices he made, or the choices he felt that were made, literally, intrinsically, as he was working, for me, there are 1,000 other choices: how big he should be in the frame, where the angle, who's in the background, what's that person doing in the background? That's fine. Okay, keep that. So it goes on like that, and ultimately, I always look at a picture. I got to say, like they talk about now, these director's cuts on DVD. No, this is it. This is the picture. There's no director's cut. This is the one. It's the result of a process that's gone on for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Pretty much every film is, but this one even longer. and everything has been melted away, shaped. It's almost like a giant piece of sculpture that we've been knocking around in the editing room. And I have to come to terms with ultimately the look of this picture, the way it's completed, and the present form of the film, and know that I've tried everything I could under the circumstances. And as you make each film, there's different circumstances, different players. The weather is a circumstance. The studio, the editing, everything is the circumstance. Even the release of a film is a circumstance too that you have to deal with.
Let's just talk about that a moment.
Yeah.
This was scheduled for Christmas, the 25th, some say. It's not scheduled for the 20th.
It's not. Yeah, I mean, but you know, Harvey Weinstein is great in marketing, great showman, and
so you're saying you trust Harvey's instinct?
Absolutely, and a studio. It reminds me of some of the older Hollywood history of Selznick or producers and studio heads of that level, and he has certain vision about films, but he also has a certain extraordinary vision, I think, and intuition about selling a picture. And he did announce 25th, but he also announced the summer. He announced this Christmas of 2001. So I'm going with him. I said, okay, you know, 2000. I'll never forget when he said, Marty, I want this out for Christmas. I was still shooting the pictures, and I'll get it out for Christmas. And I said, absolutely.
Do you remember that day on the 5 Points?
On the 5 Points.
When you had some of the Japanese investors were there.
And they said,
we're looking forward to seeing this. This was 2001 still. We're looking forward to seeing this at Christmas. And I said, did you hear that?
And he said, he's like, as Bill, of course, with his mustache. Did you hear that? And I said, yes. But the thing was, when Harvey said to me, Christmas, I said,
you're still shooting.
I'm still shooting. I said, absolutely. He said, no, Marty, 2001. I said, oh. I know I'll get it for 2002. But I really tried then, 2001, and then of course I realized that the film needed much more. I really needed shaping. It was like a year in the editing. It's a big movie, a real year in the editing. We took a couple of months off after September 11th happened. Everything kind of stopped for about 2 or 3 months. But then back into it, and we just started shaping the picture to the final form you see it now.
Let me mention one other thing here as we complete this circle about this film. There is the story of what is happening with the gangs at the time at 5 Points. There is also built into this a love story, which is Leonardo and Cameron, and the connection in this triumvirate with Bill the Butcher. Here is a scene that sort of reflects that. Take a look.
Try it and I'll bite you.
If you were gonna bite me, I don't think you'd warn me, huh?
Find out.
I should never say this, but you ought to be able to pierce the curtain and be able to hear you two guys talking about the scene. Now, first of all, you said about this that you took about 18 takes.
17 or 18 takes, yeah.
And these kids had so much energy.
You know, at first they were just blasting through the scene. I said, no, wait. I said, are you okay? He said, yeah, we can do another. We can do it. I said, you're sure? Yeah. So I kept going. I kept going. And I kept going. I was outside the room, and about after the 8th take or so, I came in between takes to say something, and both of them were on the bed breathing, trying to get some air. You okay? He says, yes, I'm fine. All right, get back in there, you know.
And you said that when she was away, not on the set, you guys all said, when's she coming back?
Bring her back.
Bring her back. Because you said she's just terrific to have, to be around. She's fun. She's attractive. She's
a source
talented.
of apparently endless goodwill.
Yes, exactly, which was really is something that you treasure.
Indiscriminate goodwill to everybody that she's working with.
Yeah.
Amazing thing.
Yeah. And a range too. I'd said I'd start to do something, and I said I needed to be somewhat more emotional if you can. And next thing you know, she was taking it to a level that I hadn't really thought of. And I was between the three of them, it was a great audience, a great member of the audience to watch these guys work. You know, everybody together.
You use some historical characters in here. Boss Tweed is in this film.
Yeah, before he was Boss Tweed, actually, right? I mean, William Tweed.
Right.
He was just on his way to becoming the world's greatest corrupt politician.
And what you see,
60 million was it?
60 million.
I think he was in debt for 60. He'd embezzled 60 million when they caught up with him.
Yeah, 1870, the New York Times got him finally.
And what you see here is not we don't have a scene saying this, but basically what it is it is to me the pure politician. Everything is about counting votes. Everything
that's
is
right.
about getting.
That's right.
I mean, is it? And no.
The quote in the film when he says, when Tweed tells his assistant, he said, the assistant says, Monk is winning by 10,000 more votes than there are people. He said, well, make it 20. We want to triumph. And he said, well, we don't have enough ballots. He says, the first rule of politics is not the ballots that win, it's the counters. It's the counters. Keep counting. That's an actual quote. We got it from the New Yorker. It was a quote from William Tweed in 1870. And it was right after the election, by the way. And it was, oh, we got to put this in, you know.
Does this film continue themes that have been part of your entire filmatic history?
I think to a certain extent, I really do. Ultimately, there's I'm attracted by the place
Right.
in a sense because it makes people behave a certain way, meaning first for survival, and ultimately, I always think person does one or two bad things. Does that mean that person is bad, genuinely bad?
Right.
You know, and sometimes it's just bad luck, and they're forced into a situation. You think of Threepenny Opera, you think of some of the lines from the lyrics, first feed the face, then talk right and wrong, and what do you expect? And I'm always drawn to that, and in a funny way, this is what we talked about, like science fiction in reverse, in a way, going back in time and creating a heightened sort of impression of what it might have been like to live in such a situation where you didn't know where your next piece of bread was coming from, if you get any bread.
In this extraordinary career, I mean, clearly this was a hole you wanted to fill. This was a movie you wanted to make. This was part of this city that you love.
Yes.
Are there other things out there that you live with in the hopes that you will be able to find the right vehicle to make the film? I mean, The Last Temptation of Christ was one of them.
That was one of them. There's a story.
I don't know if Age of Innocence was, but this.
Age of Innocence for a while there.
Yeah.
Actually, there's one that I'd like to try to do, which is based on the novel Silence by Japanese author Endo, about two Portuguese Jesuit priests who get caught in Japan in the 17th century administering to the Catholics in fishing villages there with Catholicism has been outlawed. And
Catholicism is another theme in your work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but really, the silence is interesting because ultimately it's about the silence of God, and it's about what this person is put there for on this earth. Is he there to have more martyrs, create more martyrs, or is he there to save them? And would he do anything to save those martyrs, even go against what he knows is God?
How could you not love working with this
So
guy?
no, but it's a great book, and I'm dying to do it. Then there's this wonderful thing of I had hoped Nick Pileggi and I put together for a long period of time before my father died. Yeah,
Right. Tell him what it's before. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it was basically about the Italian Americans, the Sicilians coming into New York, actually pretty much some of my father's story growing up in the 20s and 30s, really.
Do you want to make Dino? If you can get the characters you want, if you
I'm
can
not
get
sure.
Hanks, and you can get, you're not sure.
I'm not sure if I could, if I could really create the right story for Dino. I'm not sure what the story is. Nick Pileggi had a good take on it, but we left the script at a certain point, and we never came back to it. In fact, there was some point when Warner Brothers expected me to do the film, but it turned out we had a chance to do Gangs, and we switched the projects. But we were about to go for another maybe a year's work of writing on that alone, if that was to be made.
So you're not sure?
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
maybe the time will come. Yeah, maybe the time will come.
Collection of actors that you think would be
amazing.
perfect. Hanks as Dino.
Yeah.
Travolta as Sinatra. Who are the others that? It's like
it would be amazing, and we did so much work on that, and so much work, and then I felt at the end, I said, we haven't gotten it yet, and then this came along, and this has been in my head. Yeah.
So, am I going to see you 5 years from now, or am I going to see you earlier than that?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
You really don't know?
I really don't.
Did you find something not acting that was enormously satisfying in fatherhood, clearly?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I think, it's not so much to do with looking for the escape hatch.
I know.
It's just trying to, it's always been that thing of trying to find the balance that would allow me to do the work in the way that I may be able to work in a different way or do things differently, I don't know, but for whatever reason the way in which I'm able to enjoy the work most seems to mean that I then have to stay away from it for a while. for some reason. It leaves me with I don't know what. Just I don't know what.
I don't want to leave it there. Did this do anything in terms of saying, God, this is why I like doing this?
Well, it did both things. It reminded me of all the things that
exactly.
I've always loved unequivocally about the work, and quite obviously working with Martin, as you know, was, you know, in itself something that is like so hugely sustaining. You know, I mean, but it also reminded me of most of the reasons why I kept away from it.
Because it absorbs you so much. I mean, even to the extent that on the set you wanted to be called Bill, and you have this reputation.
Well, I don't remember ever making that demand. So many things.
I don't want to suggest it was a demand, but
no.
Go ahead.
No, I can't remember what I was going to say.
Sort of Bill. Sort of when you saw him, it was Bill. It was not Daniel. It was Bill. So you wouldn't call him anything else. You would call him Bill.
Was the mustache your idea, or was that?
It was. Yeah, it was. It was. I think. You see, I think for most people, the thing that gives most joy is learning about something.
Yeah.
Is satisfying a curiosity. That's where most real pleasure comes from.
Right.
And the greater part of that pleasure of discovery takes place before you start to shoot the film.
Right.
During the course of it, you make some very interesting discoveries in a very different level. I mean, it's a much more visceral pleasure because it's taking you moment by moment, and it's surprising you, and you're much less in control of what's happening. But in essence, you're giving out. You're scooping yourself out of all that stuff that you tried to gorge yourself on beforehand. And at the end of it, you feel, and I'm sure Martin feels the same way, tremendously depleted.
Oh, yeah.
And the only analogy I've ever found that vaguely kind of seemed to fit for me was the idea of leaving a field lying fallow because you just can't grow anything in it anymore. And I think it's as much that as anything else. And even from quite early on, long before I had the luxury of choice, because obviously when you're a kid and you're starting out, you're raking stuff off the shelves. You know, if it's available, you want it. You know, you want to you make your mark and do that thing. But I might have made a decision, a bad decision at some time. I don't remember specifically, but I was given this gift of this tiny piece of self-knowledge, which told me that I couldn't just keep doing that thing. If I were going to keep doing it over a long period of time, I would have to stay away from it as well. I don't know why.
Yeah, coming from where I do, and understanding letting fields lie fallow, I understand exactly now what, you know, what it could be about. Thank you for coming.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Great to see you. Marty.
Thank you.
My friend. Gangs of New York, it is an incredible film, brilliant performances. It tells a story that will grab you from the very first frame. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.